Okay, so we're at 5:05 at this point, and we don't have anyone joining us. But for those of you who wish to watch this session recorded, I certainly want to make sure that you have something to watch. So I want to go ahead and proceed with my presentation. For those of you that don't know me, my name's Ashley Larach. I am the accounting instructor here at Blue Ridge Community College, and I also I'm a CPA, and I'm also a recent graduate of Western Governors University. If you don't know about Western Governors University, I want to share a little bit about their competency-based program. So they are an online school, and they have a competency-based approach that looks at instruction in a three-pronged approach. So they have course mentors, course instructors, and course evaluators. So with competency-based, you pass or you fail, and certain objective and performance assessments. And so I was able to finish my master's in accounting program in 12 months based on moving through that model, and it was very beneficial. So I learned a lot about feedback as a student there based on their competency based model. And so after I graduated from there, I ended up getting a part-time faculty evaluator job with them. I believe in their approach, and it just it worked out really well for me to be able to work with them. And I went through their training program over the summer and early fall, and I'm still working with them in training as an evaluator. It's a non-student facing role, evaluating performance assessments. And their training is quite comprehensive, and I've learned a lot about the importance of feedback, how impactful feedback is, and it's given me a lot of things to think about in my work at Blue Ridge. And I wanted to share that with you. So that's why I've agreed to do this presentation, because I think that I have learned a lot, and hopefully maybe you'll take something away from what I've learned as well. So I'm going to turn my video off and go through this PowerPoint presentation here with you, and hopefully you'll learn something new about feedback as well. All right, so as I mentioned, I'm Ashley Larach, accounting instructor at Blue Ridge and accounting and leadership faculty evaluator with Western Governors University. All right, so again, the purpose of our chat, or the purpose of this presentation, is I want you to think about feedback in your class, whether that's seated and in person or whether that's online. And I want you to think about how you use feedback to and how you incorporate that in your class. Next thing I want you to do is I want you to think about what do you think is wrong or right about the feedback you provide. So just take a moment to think about that for a second. What do you think you're doing really good? Maybe you don't know about good, robust feedback. What are your goals? What do you want to get out of this session? Maybe jot that down on a piece of paper. Well, I think first it's important to talk about what feedback is and why do we give feedback. So feedback in and of itself is information about a person's performance of a task, right? And we use that as a basis for improvement. I think feedback is also, it should be used as an acknowledgement of something positive, and it should foster growth. Feedback is also oftentimes associated with criticism. Those words are kind of thought of as one and the same: feedback and criticism, constructive feedback, constructive criticism. That does foster growth, But I think a key point is to acknowledge something that's positive. So take another moment to reflect. I want you to think about a time that you received feedback. Maybe that was in your annual review at your job. Maybe it was when you solicited feedback from a friend or a coworker, maybe your spouse or a parent, confidant. You were seeking feedback, or maybe you weren't seeking feedback. Think about your feelings for a minute. Yes, we got to talk about feelings. What kind of emotions did that feedback spark in you? What kind of words were used? Was it accurate? Was it helpful? Maybe it was a situation where you didn't receive feedback, but you thought you should have. Did it leave you feeling or wondering about feelings of uncertainty? It left you wondering the unknown. What did I do? What did I not do, wrong or right? Maybe you did receive feedback, but it was late and you lost out on an opportunity for that improvement. Or maybe it was overly positive feedback. Maybe it was overly negative feedback. Sometimes overly positive feedback doesn't feel genuine. We sometimes use the word awesome or super, great, amazing. It doesn't always feel genuine. Maybe that overly positive or overly negative feedback wasn't consistent with the message that you had been receiving. So maybe you were surprised. Now I want you to do one thing. Take that feeling and put yourself in the student's shoes. And think about the student's perspective when they receive feedback from you. So let's talk about those words. The power of words. Go back to those words in your feedback that you received. What were they? Now write those down. Just kind of jot them down somewhere. Write those words down. Think about those emotions. Remember that word great, awesome, super, wonderful. If you write those things, do you mean it? Is it genuine? Is it accurate? Are your words helpful to your students, and are they encouraging? So think about a few different words. And these are some words that I've learned at Western Governors University. Their goals are to provide accurate, helpful, and timely feedback. That's their 3 goals with their evaluators: accurate, helpful, and timely. I think those are fairly basic, but very impactful kind of goals. Think about the words sufficient, detailed, accurately or accurate, descriptive, appropriate. Do these kind of words maybe better describe an assignment that your student submitted to you? Perhaps the student sufficiently described how social media marketing impacts marketing. I don't know, whatever course it may be, for example. Is it sufficient? Maybe it's a solid C paper. Sufficient seems to reflect that, right? I don't think great or awesome would. What if the student accurately describes a term for maybe a biology or anatomy course? What if the procedures or the perhaps the lesson plan that an early childhood educator prepares is appropriate? It's appropriate. So think about the power of words. Are they genuine? Are they accurate? Are they helpful to that student? And are they encouraging? So communicating feedback to our students, that can be a challenge at times. First of all, they need to know where they can locate that feedback within their My Courses or LMS. Hopefully they know where they can retrieve that. If they don't, which I know in our ACA courses, we do a really good job of explaining to our students where they can locate that feedback. Maybe at the beginning of our class or in our syllabus confirmation quiz, we need to add in an acknowledgement or a directive of where they can receive that feedback, right? But if we're directing them to where they can read that feedback, we need to make sure that we are timely with our feedback. Remember to check yourself. Are you biased? As humans, we have inherent biases, but we need to think about those biases and remove that as much as possible. Maybe we don't like a certain product that the student's writing about, or we have a bad personal experience with something. We need to be as objective as possible. We need to be specific in communicating our feedback so that we can foster that growth. We need to be regular in our feedback and frequent. We need to provide it often, not just at the end of the course. We need to be genuine and appropriate. Avoid being overly positive or overly negative. That's not encouraging. And we also need to be open to discussion of that feedback. So if we provide feedback to a student and we expect them to read it, I think it's fair to allow the student to expect us to have a conversation if they wish. That way, if they're not understanding our feedback, if they don't deem it to be as helpful as possible, we can provide further clarification for them. So we need to be open to that discussion. And in that discussion, we might find that there's maybe an error in our grading, or something that the student may have intended a different message in their writing. So we need to think about how we communicate our feedback. So one thing I've learned at Western Governors also, I did not cite where this came from, unfortunately, the stoplight method. I'm sure some of you have heard of the stoplight method. And no, these are not in order. I prefer to start with something positive, that's something that is present. And this is similar to how I was trained with Western Governors, is immediately what is present. So what exists? It's an acknowledgement, right? I'm not giving them, it's genuine and it is not inaccurate. I am acknowledging what is present. So perhaps I start with the submission includes a discussion of a financial statement analysis of two companies. So what is there? What is there? Or, your work includes X, Y, and Z. Or the submission is completed. The case study has been completed in its entirety. So we acknowledge that they completed it. So good job, but it may not be correct. So then we move on to red. What is insufficient about the work? Is it lacking details? Is it, incorrect calculations? And then we can move in with our yellow. What comments can you provide to be helpful, instructive, and corrective? So that helps them grow. Put yourself in the student's shoes for a moment. If you were to receive feedback and immediately you read, this is incorrect, that is incorrect, but it immediately gives you a negative feeling, and you may almost instantly be closed off to reading anything else. It sets a tone. So if you can set a positive tone by acknowledging whatever it was, and sometimes that may be hard, but you can dig deep and you can find whatever it is that they did, that they provided to you, to acknowledge their work that's genuine. You don't have to be overly positive, but genuine and appropriate. And then you move on to, and here's what's wrong about it, but here's how we can improve that. Or here's a tidbit or a helpful link, or maybe we need to get together and have a conversation. So think about how you might use the stoplight method in your feedback. We need to talk about setting standards as a basis for our feedback. We have to have a solid foundation of why we are providing feedback. And basically, we need to give students specific instructions on a task or an assignment. We need to set those expectations for the assignment. Otherwise, how are they supposed to know what they are supposed to do? So think about that for a minute. How are they supposed to know what they're supposed to do? We give them explicit instructions that are specific, and we set the expectation. So how do we do these things? How can we put these into play? Well, here at Blue Ridge, we use Moodle, or My Courses as we call it. And we have some well-built rubrics. And I'm going to show you an example here in just a moment of those. Checklist, I have another example as well. Marking guides, but we can also have conversations with our students, especially if they're in person, and go through those assignments and let them know what you expect. And then when it comes to feedback time, there's not, hopefully, not too many surprises or disappointments in what they hear, and they know what has been expected of them. So let's look at a rubric. And up on the screen here, I have to the left, I have an assignment for an accounting course. And then to the right, I have the rubric, a portion, a very small portion. This is a very large rubric with a lot of aspects of how that is graded. So I gave this a lot of thought. The motivation behind this was initially, the motivation to create the rubric was there was going to be a lot of students in this class online course. And I thought, oh my goodness, how in the world am I going to be able to grade all of these things from all of these students in an 8-week course with a quick turnaround, and it be manageable and efficient and get that feedback to them quickly. So this assignment is turned in at the end of the course. They are presented with this assignment at the very beginning of the course, and we talk through it and we learn about these concepts throughout the course. So what they're supposed to do is, number one, obtain the most recent annual report for 2 competitor companies. So think Lowe's and Home Depot. And they go out on the web and they go to the sec.gov and they obtain their most annual reports. And they are to get 2 years of income statement data and 2 years of balance sheet data. All right, and then there's some more explicit instructions about who they can and cannot use, that sort of thing from the course. Then I asked them to, in number 2, create one Excel file. And I want them to have 6 different workbooks or worksheets. And I want them to label the tabs. And I want them to perform these particular horizontal analyses, vertical analyses, ratio analyses for each of the companies. So they end up with 6 different worksheets. It's very explicit. And I tell them exactly what they're supposed to do, how many ratios they're supposed to calculate and compare. And I also tell them of the ratios. There are 3 categories, and I tell them that it should be a mixture of those 3 categories of liquidity, solvency, and profitability. And the very last category of this assignment, or phase of this assignment, is after they have crunched the numbers and they have prepared these analyses, I want them to take the information and understand what it's telling them. So in accounting, we're interpreting numbers. So I asked them to write a short written report comparing their 2 companies, and then I provide them, very explicit, state your decision based on, who you're going to invest in based on financial components and not your personal perspective. So basically I tell them, just because you like Nike's clothes does not substantiate why you're going to invest in them. Tell me why with numbers and interpret that and back it up, substantiate it. So they're provided with specific information and they're provided with a rubric within the assignment. They can see that the entire time. So they know how they're graded. So for example, we have, did you submit the Excel file? It's one file with 6 different worksheets, 5 points. because amazingly enough, a lot of students don't read instructions, and in a lot of times we get 6 different files and it's a nightmare to grade. So if it's worth 5 points to them, hopefully they'll do what they're asked. And then you go on down here, we can see the vertical analysis tab for the file. Did they do it? If they submitted it, if they did not submit it, they get no points. I think that's fair for this assignment, so they get no points. If they did submit it and it includes partial information like 1 year of data or one company only, or their calculations are grossly incorrect, they get half points for that bucket, so 7 points. But if they want all 15 points for this particular aspect, they compare the 2 years data for the balance sheet and income statement. The analysis is in proper form. It lists amounts in percent columns for each year. The calculations are correct and percentages are expressed properly as a total of the respective categories. And there are few calculation errors are acceptable. So, they can have a few mess ups. This is, we're not expecting perfection. So I do allow for some kind of lenience there to be human. So that's how I use this rubric for feedback. So the student can see, and they can see what's not there and why they got the points and why they got what they got for their grade. So for example, if they got this vertical analysis, the 7 points, I did use kind of the stoplight method. I did say it was submitted, it's present, it is there. However, here's what's insufficient or missing. And then I can still use my overall comment and add, some additional information, but it's efficient and it eliminates a lot of grading time. So the time spent on building this rubric, I thought about this for a good day and did this in about a day. It is not perfect by any means, but it's a really good starting point, and it will hopefully be a big time saver for me this semester. So think about the ways that you might be able to develop a rubric for some of your assignments that it has feedback built in already, where you could, maybe a student submits a really amazing Excel file, or they have just some really fantastic ideas about why they would invest in that company that are substantiated, and you want to acknowledge that fosters that growth, that gives them that positive feedback. You could add that into your overall comment as well. So then I also use checklist as a form of feedback. Here, this is an assignment for the Accounting 150 course, which is basically learning how to use QuickBooks Online. It's a very tough course to manage with a lot of students because everyone's very timid and afraid they're going to mess something up, although we can always correct it. So for example, I tasked the student with completing activities, and then once they complete the activities in those assignments, in that particular order, I asked them to generate 2 reports and upload them. And I'm very specific. I want them in PDF. They're easier to grade in PDF for me in this way. I use a checklist, and I also ask them to check their errors and make sure that everything's correct before they submit their assignment. And so the checklist is here to your left. And what I'm looking for is in the vendor balance summary report, for example, the all dates, the date range for the report. Oftentimes that is one of the most common errors in this course is the students do not change their date ranges, and therefore the information generated in the reports is all incorrect. So in order to avoid that, that's the first thing that I list, and I give them 1 point if they do that. This checklist is also available to the student right up front. They see that when they click on the assignment, and they know exactly what their report is supposed to look like. Now, this isn't possible to use for every single course in this way. I do give the students the answer, basically. So I say, hey, this report is supposed to show For example, Bonnie's Dog Biscuits. This is a dog grooming company. Both a bill and a bill payment for $55.50. And that bill payment is dated 8/10/2026 in this report. If the student uploads that report and it says that, I know they have done the work. There's no other way to get that report to say that. There's no way to compromise that integrity of that report. So if that is correct, then they have done the task correctly and they should receive those points. So that's how I utilize the checklist in this particular class. You might be able to utilize this checklist in maybe an information technology course or some other way. So I encourage you to think about how you might use a checklist, a rubric, or even a marking guide in your feedback to make it efficient. And you can always add those general overall comments. So ultimately, in the end, we want to provide appropriate encouragement to our students. We want to see improvement, and we want our communications to be clear to them. But we also want to be efficient. We're all busy, and we want to incorporate efficiencies where we can. Some of these tools do have a little bit of work on the front end. They save a lot of work on the back end. And hopefully they minimize some of the emails and phone calls and stressful panics of students. But I want you to just think about, again, think about being in that student's shoes and how feedback is received from their perspective. I think that we can provide that in a way that's not overly positive or overly harsh and critical, that's effective, and it does foster that growth. So I would love to know what your ideas are. I know this is a recording, but maybe take a moment and reflect on your courses and reflect on what you are teaching or planning to teach in the spring. And what are your ideas about feedback? How can you make your feedback more genuine, more appropriate, more constructive, more helpful, more accurate, more timely? I think that we have the tools to do those things if we know how to use them. I know the teaching and learning folks are always available to help us with those mechanics, getting rubrics set up, marking guides, so on and so forth. And I would love to hear, and I know Sarah and the folks there in the Teaching and Learning Center departments would love to hear your thoughts on how you can improve your feedback. So I hope you have learned a little bit and enjoyed the presentation. And I appreciate your time and hope you have a great rest of your day.